The headlines on RT, US lawmakers are expected to release a damning report on torture under President George W. Bush, although officials make sure the findings are heavily redacted. Also, US allies commit more troops to help battle Islamic State in Iraq, with Washington insisting it won't lead to another ground war. And why you can't say Happy Christmas in some parts of Europe this year because of political correctness gone mad. Hello, welcome. It's nice to have your company. You're watching RT International. Now, the torture of terror suspects by the CIA under President George W. Bush went beyond legal limits and was excessively brutal. That, according to US officials, is the conclusion of a congressional intelligence report. Its summary is expected to be made public on Tuesday, following months of delays over security concerns. The probe looked into multiple cases of abuse, waterboarding and humiliation of detainees took place at notorious sites like Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib. Some captives also endured painful stress positions for hours and were forcefully deprived of sleep. Well, Washington has apparently made sure the bulk of the torture report will be kept from the public. Secretary of State John Kerry gave Congress an urgent call ahead of the release, as Gianni reports.
The State Department says they did not ask Congress to delay the release of the report. The spokesperson, Jem Psaki, says the Secretary of State just called Senator Dianne Feinstein to discuss the timing and foreign policy implications of the upcoming release. To my question, what exactly may not be right with the timing, she said Secretary of State did not discuss whether it was good or bad timing. They just talked, you know, as old friends do. But really, we have no way of knowing how that conversation went. It is the assessment of the U.S. intelligence community that the release of this report could endanger international partnerships as well as U.S. personnel overseas. Mike Rogers, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, said the release is a terrible idea, and there's a lot of opposition to the report, especially among those who served in the Bush administration. But even the Obama administration that backed the investigation from its outset was heavily involved in controlling what's going to come out of it. The classified report is 6,200 pages long. The public may see a fifth of that. The report was redacted by the CIA and the White House, and heavily redacted, as we understand. One of the things that congressional staffers complained about was that the administration tried to black out parts of the text in such a way that would render it unintelligible. Then there was the scandal, of course, with the CIA getting into congressional staffers' computers to delete certain documents. So yes, this may be a damning report, but the CIA and the administration in general have been very much involved in its production. You know what word this torture report will not include? Torture. Reportedly, that is because of certain political and legal implications, even though President Obama himself used that word in his now famous quote, "We tortured some folks." The report is, however, expected to detail the torture practices the CIA used in the wake of 9/11. From what I heard and read, it also finds the techniques were not effective in getting information. It alleges the agency systematically lied to itself, to the White House and the Department of Justice, and to Congress about how well they worked. Of course, we have to wait and see the actual report.
Meanwhile, Washington says it has increased security measures at US facilities overseas, fearing a violent backlash over the report's release. Well, former CIA analyst Ray McGovern thinks the findings will simply confirm what's already known about America's torture tactics. He spoke with Anisa Nowie on RT's In the Now.
Is John Kerry suggesting that no one among the radical people fighting in the Middle East, that they don't know about CIA torture? Well, hello. A lot of them were tortured. The report is very damning. It shows that the CIA lied to Congress. It shows that the CIA lied to the Justice Department in achieving approval for these techniques on the grounds that they worked, achieving the kind of evidence that would permit George W. Bush and Dick Cheney to prove that al-Qaeda was being trained by Saddam Hussein. There was a link between al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, and as a result of that, 69% of the American people believed that Saddam Hussein and Iraq were involved in 9/11 when we attacked Iraq. That's how cynical, that's how damaging, and that's how evildoerish this whole thing was.
We'll stay with the States because protesters have blocked traffic in several rallies across New York. Demonstrations against police brutality have been held for 6 consecutive nights in the US, and this after a grand jury decision not to charge a white officer for putting a 43-year-old black man in a lethal chokehold. Alexei Yaroshevsky was in the thick of last night's unrest.
A usually busy intersection in Brooklyn, New York now sees what the protesters describe as a die-in. They are pretty much on the ground, symbolizing the people who were killed in the hands of policemen across the country. That's the 6th day already of their rage following the grand jury decision not to indict a New York City police officer. Earlier, they attempted to shut down the Barclays Center over there, the place where an NBA game is now taking place, and they described it as a royal shutdown because the members of the British royal family were inside that building, and the protesters wanted to deliver their message to them. Now, the protests are not dying down. They're lined up for every day of this week, and protesters say they will not stop. On Saturday, they're bringing at least 30,000 people into the streets. That's according to the Facebook page, and needless to say, the presence of the police will be huge there. It's right now, as you can see, there's a lot of policemen there. They're pretty much securing this. It hasn't been particularly violent or tense here, although we saw some scuffles between the protesters and the police. We cannot confirm whether there were any arrests made, unlike last week when in excess of 300 people were arrested. But then again, the protesters say they will protest every day, and it's really hard to tell where these protests will go and how long and how numerous they will be. Alexei Yaroshevsky, RT, reporting from New York City.
Civil disorder has been erupting across the country. These are pictures from Oakland where eyewitnesses say police tear gas rioters after they tried to set cars on fire there. Activists also attempted to block highways and clashed with police. We'll be keeping a close watch on the protests here on RT International. Now, it is the festive season, but some councils in England are afraid to wish you Happy Christmas. In fact, they're even opting not to use images of Jesus Christ on their Christmas cards, worried they might offend other religions. Harry Fear has the story.
How Christmassy are you feeling? It's the season to be jolly. But isn't it also the season to remember the birth of Jesus? Is this not the largest religious festival of each year? Well, perhaps not, according to some of the UK's local councils. Under pressure in 2014 not to offend minorities and non-Christians. This Christmas, half of local councils have done away with religious expressions like Happy Christmas on their official greetings cards and instead opted for non-religious seasons greetings, for example. Well, do you prefer the more religious Madonna and Child card or the more seasonal Christmas winter snowy scene card? Out of 200 local authorities surveyed, only one is sending their annual greetings card with a mention of Jesus Christ. So is this just political correctness gone mad? Yes, say some Christian campaigners. One I spoke to believes the evidence is clear that non-Christian Brits are not offended by Christian Christmas exclamations. The UK, of course, is increasingly non-church attending and non-religious, but the group Christmas Starts with Christ recently surveyed thousands of families, and their findings indicate that 1 in 3 UK children aged 10 to 13 didn't know Christmas is even about the birth of Jesus. It's all left many wondering whether the UK is now experiencing an unprecedentedly unreligious, de-Christianised Christmas season. In London, I'm Harry Fear, RT.
And controversies over Christmas arise not just in the UK at the moment, but also on the other side of the Channel. A French court has banned a nativity scene in a town in the west of the country. Authorities were forced to remove the installation from a local council building, responding to complaints from a secular campaign group. Activists say the nativity scene was incompatible with the French principle of religious neutrality in public spaces. Still to come in the programme, a good trick to get out of a speeding ticket. All you need is a Rubik's Cube and a bit of magic. We've got the story in a couple of minutes.
I'm Marinade. Join me on Boom Bust for in-depth, impartial, and en vogue financial reporting, commentary, interviews, and much, much more. Only on Boom Bust and only on RT.
The interview for tomorrow is confirmed. 10 a.m.
At the word trade, it is hoped that they will find a global solution to a global problem.
The protesters call for a total revamp of the system.
Hello again, you're watching RT. Now, the US-led coalition has pledged to boost the number of forces fighting against Islamic State in Iraq. An extra 1,500 troops will now be added to the over 3,000 already there to help train and advise local soldiers, although the White House still insists they are not edging towards another ground war. Marina Portnaya has the details.
As the U.S. enters its fifth month of military offensive against the Islamic State, it appears Washington is having a difficult time sticking to the original plan.
I will not allow the United States to be dragged into fighting another war in Iraq. And so even as we support Iraqis as they take the fight to these terrorists, American combat troops will not be returning to fight in Iraq.
But month after month, more U.S. soldiers have been returning to the war-torn country they exited just 2 years ago.
We will send an additional 475 service members to Iraq.
And the number keeps growing. Currently, President Obama has allowed 3,100 troops to be deployed to Iraq.
Do you think there's any prospect that these forces will be fighting in combat?
No,
none.
They're out. Well, no, they're not. They're not there for a combat mission. Just more of our guys doing it in a wider array of places. We don't see this, being something that we're going to have to expand again in the near term. That's why we wanted to go with a big enough number now.
The slow expansion of war aims, terrain, and scope is what's otherwise referred to as mission creep. And some critics say even that description doesn't go far enough to describe what's happening in the U.S.-led campaign against the Islamic State.
This is not mission creep, this is a mission sprint. They are moving very, very quickly to expand the U.S. engagement in this new global war on terror. The escalation of fighting in Iraq is already turning this into a broad global war on terror that is very centralized in the expanded Middle East. This is no longer, if it ever was, simply a war in Iraq. This is now a war throughout the region.
Let's remember, what began as a campaign of airstrikes against IS targets in Iraq has already developed into a bigger battle.
I've made it clear that we will hunt down terrorists who threaten our country wherever they are. That means I will not hesitate to take action against ISIL in Syria as well as Iraq. This is a core principle of my presidency. If you threaten America, you will find no safe haven.
According to the Pentagon, American taxpayers have spent an average of $8 million a day and more than $300,000 an hour on Washington's borderless operation against the Islamic State. An offensive that's reportedly exceeded $1 billion and apparently shows no end in sight.
We will engage in this campaign for as long as it takes to prevail.
Judging by America's record with al-Qaeda and the Taliban, prevailing against the Islamic State will take many years and a whole lot of military might. And that means more of the costly conflict President Obama vowed the U.S. wouldn't be dragged into. Marina Portnaya, RT.
It's just gone 12:15 here in Moscow. Let's have a quick look now at some other world news. Two suicide car bombers have driven vehicles with explosives into an army headquarters in the eastern Yemeni city of Sayun. At least 5 soldiers died in the attack and 8 were wounded. A militant group in the region, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, says it has carried out the assault. In Maryland, in the US, a small private jet has crashed into a house, killing 3 people on board and 3 on the ground. It came down as it was trying to land at a nearby airfield. One house was completely destroyed, another 2 were set on fire. An investigation is yet to determine the cause of the crash. And confrontation between supporters and opponents of new settlements for refugees has led to scuffles with police in Berlin. The two sides have been staging protests against each other for at least 2 weeks. German authorities are building 6 camps that will house more than 2,000 refugees as they struggle to provide care for a growing number of migrants. The first village is scheduled to open just before Christmas. Now, France is experiencing a worrying increase in anti-Semitic attacks. They've doubled in the last year. A violent assault on a Jewish couple last week has prompted French authorities to make fighting anti-Semitism a national priority. Peter Oliver takes a closer look.
It has to be out to be anti-Semitic and in to be respectful and tolerant for people that are different than I am.
However, in Paris last week, there was no sign of that change. A young Jewish couple were attacked in their home and a 19-year-old woman raped by 3 masked, armed men who came to rob them, saying, "You Jews have money." The sickening assault drew this response from the French president.
Jews have lived in France for 2,000 years and have had citizenship since the revolution. When such dramas occur, such tragedies, it's not simply the family that's wounded and attacked. It is the greatness of France that finds itself wounded.
Armed guards are a common sight at Jewish sites around the world. This is what we were told in Germany.
Every hospital, every Jewish school, every Jewish cemetery, and of course every synagogue is protected by the Berlin police. Some premises we will only drive by, do a patrol every so and so many hours, but all the schools, all the synagogues are protected with guards standing in front of them, sometimes 24 hours a day.
Despite this, attacks against Jews have spiked recently. In the aftermath of this summer's Israeli military operation in Gaza, tempers have flared. In Berlin, people were angry at the military muscle being flexed by Tel Aviv, which left over 2,000 Palestinians and over 70 Israelis dead.
We want to raise awareness here that the people in Palestine are under massive oppression.
While the demonstrators claimed that they were critical of Israeli policy, Jewish community leaders say it went too far.
It is legitimate to criticize any government within a certain framework. What we have seen here had nothing to do directly with the criticism of the war that took place in Israel, because when calls are being made on the streets, death to the Jews, that is something which is far beyond. And that is something where every single responsible person has to stand up and say, no, we cannot allow this to happen.
With far-right extremist marches and riots like this one in Poland, and the growth of political groups like Golden Dawn in Greece, there are concerns that the mistakes of the past are being forgotten. This memorial in Berlin is dedicated to the memory of those who were murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust. Over 6 million Jews were put to death in the 1930s and 1940s. But despite poignant reminders like this one, anti-Semitism continues to raise its ugly head, both here and elsewhere in Europe. Peter Oliver, RT, Berlin.
Now, do you use a special trick to get out of paying a speeding ticket, flirting, or a sob story perhaps? Well, a New York magician mesmerised police officers with his Rubik's Cube when he was stopped.
13, 14.
Keep on going past 15. Keep on going.
16, 17.
We'll go for 20.
19, 20.
Like that. So about 20.
Holy
Stephen Brungade there, wowing officers after being pulled over for breaking the speed limit, and his magic didn't stop there.
Watch it. With it mixed up, if I turn it once, it's still going to be mixed up. The cheating happens when you toss it in the air like that. Oh, the 1 second part.
How did you do that?
Good question. How did he do it? Well, we asked the magician to repeat his trick, and if you watch closely, you might figure it out.
So they pulled me over and they said I was going 12 miles over, and I thought I was going to get a ticket, and the cop saw all my magic stuff in the car, so he was kind of curious what I did. He asked if I was a poker player. I told him no, and I said I was a magician, so he was kind of interested, and he asked me to show him a trick. So we'll really mix it up. You can see it mixed up, right? On every side. If I turn it one time, it's still going to be mixed up. Watch it, I'll just give it a blow.
I still don't know how he did that, but if that's not magic enough, Dutch real estate agents have a trick or two up their sleeve at the moment too. Buying a house can be an emotional roller coaster, and in the Netherlands they're taking it quite literally. One was built through a house that was up for sale, believe it or not, all part of a publicity stunt by a bank to help sellers, with potential buyers getting a speedy tour through the property. Certainly would get the thumbs up from the kids, wouldn't it?
Woonkamer met aangebouwde scène heeft openslaande deuren. De geniete aanwezigheid van de scène en een veranda.
Although it might get a bit annoying after a while. Up next, it's Boom Bust with Erin Aid.